declaration of zero-emission cars. There are Nissan and Toyota in the UK. They have a factory, but Honda get out because one of the reasons is Brexit, I think. So, but yesterday's declarations, we cannot find the name of Toyota, Nissan, and Japanese government in declaration. Why do you think they don't join the declaration?
Well, obviously, you'd have to ask them why they didn't join. I think what we're seeing today is a significant systemic shift. Not every country and not every company has signed up, but you'll know, for example, that the European Commission has advised the EU for a 2035 phase-out date, that California, which makes the market in many ways, has a similar date, and that both China and the US, which are the other two big markets that drive the global kind of regulatory demands, have big 2025 and 2030 targets, which are in line. The other thing I should say is that we have over 1,000 cities in the race to zero, and many of those with net zero targets earlier than 2050, often driven by air quality concerns, so very keen to accelerate the shift to electric vehicles. And so, although there's a much smaller number of cities signed this declaration, I think if given time, you might find that nearly all of those 1,000, and many of those 1,000 are in Japan. So our sense is that this is a whole market shift, and those companies that haven't yet made that commitment for whatever reason will not be able to buck the market. They'll have to meet the overall trend of the end of the combustion engine in the mid-30s.
Lady in the front here.
Thanks. Emily Beeman from PA. What sense are you getting from countries about where the really difficult issues are going to be in agreeing the cover decision? And do you think that the language on coal and fossil fuel subsidies is going to survive to the final text? Thank you.
So we had an informal plenary this morning, or earlier this afternoon, if I can say. I think there were a range of views that were expressed by different groups. I think there were certain elements of the cover decision that were welcomed. There were other elements of the cover decision which various parties raised concerns about. And I think we had a whole range of views that were expressed. What Archie, and I'll invite him if he wants to come in next, what Archie will be doing is going through the detailed feedback from parties this afternoon, and then we will have to reflect. But we set the text was put together on the basis of what we heard from parties in the first place. On previous days we've talked about the non-paper that was put forward, and we have reflected the views of parties in this. Let's see where we get to, but I want to continue to be high ambition. And I would just say one other point is that, as asked about whether we are still pushing for keeping 1.5 alive, I would just say to all colleagues, please think back to what Mia Mottley said at the World Leaders Summit, where she made the point that 2 degrees for her country and many other island states was going to be a death sentence. That's why it's important and vital that we work to keep 1.5 within reach. Archie, do you want to?
Thank you. I'd echo what the COP president has said in terms of the collaborative way that we have developed the text. I would also highlight that, as you will have seen, there are several placeholders which are there because there are ongoing negotiations which are through both the technical and the ministerial tracks, and we need to see those mature and develop before those can then be brought into the text. I think when they do, that will help with the overall balance. That will also help with giving more meat to the direction on each of the issues as outlined. Thank you.
Thanks. Lady on the right here.
Thank you. Hannah Thomas-Peter from Sky News. Mr. Sharma, if I may. Saudi Arabia has been accused of trying to derail the summit because it's so opposed to so many of the elements in the cover text. You have just met with the energy minister. Is it your view that Saudi Arabia is still trying to derail the summit, and what happened in that meeting?
Well, so I've been asked my views on individual countries over the course of all of these press conferences, and you'll forgive me if I give the same consistent message, which is that I'm not going to give a running commentary on conversations that I'm having with individual parties or indeed negotiating groups as well. My job is to build consensus. My job is to deliver a consistent message on what we're trying to achieve. And as I said, my message to absolutely every single party here and every negotiating group is the same, is that we are looking for a high ambition outcome in Glasgow. And the reason for that is what the world demands, and that is what all of our individual peoples demand.
For ease, the gentleman behind with the red tie.
Thank you, Francisco Camacho, The Daily Times. I recognize, as you said, Mr. Sharma, that your official position remains that 1.5 is within reach, but I just talked this afternoon with a professor at Queen's University Belfast who specializes in the green political economy, and he and many others are saying that this is confirming that 1.5 is dead. And I know it's not lost on anyone here what that means for many of the frontline regions of the world, like my familial home in Micronesia, where my 12-year-old cousin still lives. So my questions then are twofold. First, what action do you expect to be produced from what you claim to be a very high ambition cover draft? And second, what would you say to my 12-year-old cousin CJ and people like her who live in these areas that, as you have said, will bear the brunt of climate change?
Yes, thank you for that. Look, my message to your cousin, CJ, and indeed to anyone living at the front line of climate change is that we are fighting tooth and nail to make sure that we have an ambitious outcome. And I have reminded ministers and negotiators this afternoon that world leaders came, they set out their words in terms of the ambition they wanted to see. We now need to translate that into commitment and action. And that's what these next few days are about. And frankly, if we're not able to do that, then ministers, negotiators, world leaders are going to have to look in the eye, people in their countries and other countries, and explain why we did not get this one over the line. In terms of your specific issue of how we are able to get more ambition, I think if you look at the details of the draft of the cover text, it makes references to countries coming back ahead of the stocktake. It makes references to synthesis reports being on an annual basis. So there is a clear, if I can put it like this, green thread throughout these cover decisions texts, which sets out how that additional ambition is going to have to come forward. I mean, if Archie wants to say any more, you're very welcome, Archie.
Thank you. I would just add that in addition to that language and the ambition on reducing emissions, it's important to note the ambition on scaling up adaptation and also on finance, referencing the efforts that have already been made, also recognizing with regret where that has fallen short, and really setting the direction in terms of scaling up both action and finance for adaptation, also scaling up the political priority and imperative as well as action on loss and damage, and also enabling all of the financial flows, both public and private, to enable the transition. Thank you.
Gentleman in the second row here, in the centre.
James Murray from Business Green. One of the other reported key sticking points is around climate finance and loss and damage and adaptation all going forward. To President Sharma, how will you convince your colleagues in government that more money is needed, both now and from 2025, to secure a deal here and get poorer and developing countries on board and give them the climate justice they're asking for?
Yes, I think what I would say more generally is that obviously we set out the delivery plan, which was put together by Jochen Flashbart and Jonathan Wilkinson, and there have been further announcements here in terms of additional funds. I also set out today where we've got to in terms of the adaptation fund, and also the LDC fund. There is no doubt a real ask from developing nations, from climate vulnerable nations, for more to be done on adaptation. I can tell you that we are pushing very hard to see whether there is something that can be delivered in terms of rebalancing between adaptation and mitigation finance. And the second issue I think that has come up consistently has been about access to finance as well. And a few days ago I set out the plans that have come out of the task force for access to finance, where 5 pilot projects are being launched in countries around the world so that we can support the access to finance issue and ensure that we are finding solutions to that as well.
Would you like to add any more, Archie? Okay, gentleman in the centre, in the black.
George Kozhevnikov, reporter for Russian magazine called Plus One. Russian delegation has a lot of representatives at this COP. However, all of them were unable to answer any of our questions during the last 10 days. So it's really hard to understand the level of their involvement into negotiations. Now, you just said that you don't comment on activity of delegation, so I don't expect you to get into any insights about engagement of Russia. But how do you suggest that we Russian journalists do our work?
Sorry, I'm not sure I quite got that. So in terms of your work as a journalist?
Yeah, because we can't report to Russian people on what we do in this summit, because our delegation don't provide us with any information and you don't comment on their activity also.
Well, obviously what, from a presidency point of view, we are not able to do is require delegations to speak to journalists. You will appreciate that. What I can tell you is that we are holding these daily press conferences, and throughout this whole process of when we took on COP26, we have been open, we've been transparent, and I hope that is reflected from the parties as well. And we will continue to hold these press conferences. There are a whole range of events that you will all have been to as well, and I'm sure there are a range of colleagues and parties who would be very happy to speak to you about their views on what's going on here in Glasgow.
Gentleman in the second row here.
Another question for you, President. Alistair Thompson from Scoop Media in New Zealand. The question is another one on finance, and it relates to the private sector finance and the ideas about first loss capital, which seem to be being explored. Is it likely that that will in fact be included in texts in a constructive way to start private finance flowing as quickly as possible?
I think what I'm not going to do is sort of comment on developing text. I mean, Archie's welcome if he wants to get into the detail of that. I mean, I know the first loss issue is something that has been more widely discussed as well outside this COP, and I know that's a particular ask from some of the private sector. I mean, I think there is a wider issue on that in terms of the multilateral agencies that are out there in terms of how they might support such instruments. But as I said, I think from a COP perspective, this has not been a particular focus.
Archie, do you want to add? No, it's fine. Lady on the right-hand side here, I think. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Daniela Chiaretis, Valor Econômico, São Paulo, Brazil. 2 questions, please. One is on Article 6, if you can say if there is any positive movement on that. And second question is about the other crisis we are experiencing, which is the COVID crisis. And I would like to know if you can tell us how many cases of COVID we have inside here.
On Article 6, I mean, if Archie wants to come in on this again, I think we're probably restricted on what we can say. But on the issue of COVID, I've been asked about this before, and obviously the numbers are with the health authorities in Scotland and ultimately belong to them, and therefore we can't set those out. What I can tell you, and I think we had some colleagues from the Scottish health system who did sort of comment on this in the media yesterday and made the point that rates are extremely low. As I said in previous press conferences, there is no particular cause for concern at all. We are not complacent, but I do think in that respect we are doing well.
Thank you. On Article 6, as you know, we have asked Minister Fu from Singapore and Minister Ida from Norway to consult with parties and facilitate discussions in order to find resolution. From their latest update, it appears that the three main issues that were identified before in terms of the corresponding adjustments on the 6.4 mechanism, the accounting that would take place, also the transition of pre-2020 units into the new Sustainable Development Mechanism, and also the question of share of proceeds from transfers through Article 6.2, the international cooperation, that those remain the three main sticking issues. We are encouraged that parties continue to engage on those issues, and we have heard a number of bridging solutions being put forward. It remains to be seen how parties are responding to those and whether which of those and whether they will be able to reach resolution. I should also say that work is continuing on technical tracks as well, on the Clean Development Mechanism, and also on the work on Article 6.8, non-market frameworks, which is an essential part of Article 6, and that work continues as well. Thank you.
We're out of time, I'm afraid now. We will see you tomorrow. Thank you.